It's all about the sort of journey of the experience, not the thing that you're actually fighting about.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Arts and Culture Podcasts. If you haven't, please take a second to rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please make sure you're following us on Spotify or Apple. And did you know we have a YouTube channel? Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really means a lot. You can actually see a lot of our video episodes on YouTube. And if you don't want to listen to any ads that are going to happen throughout the episode, even though I love all of our sponsors, of course, you can listen to our ad-free episodes on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And right now, you can get 1 week for free to see all of the ad-free episodes. And all of those episodes are also video episodes. So you can get to watch me, the guest, and you can also listen to all of Mary's True Crime and Academia episodes ad-free. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the episode. So before listening to today's Queer as Folk rewatch episode, I just want to let you all know this was recorded in the spring of 2024. So I've been waiting to release this episode in light of the election and politics. Don't worry, it's not an episode where we're recapping what happened with the election. I'll allow all political commentators to do that. However, I did want you all to know that my guest today, Dr. Neil J. Young, just wrote a book that is now out. It is called Coming Out Republican, A History of the Gay Right. As you will learn, he is not coming out as Republican, even though he gets that misconception a lot. But it is a book about the history of the gay right. So if you didn't know, there are a lot of gay Republicans throughout history. And let's just say all we have to do is look at the recent Republican convention and Grindr crashing. So that tells us a little about some skeletons literally in the Republicans' closet. So I wanted to let you all know there's another aspect of this interview that has changed, which is I now have moved in with my boyfriend. So when this came out, I was still living on Long Island. My boyfriend was living at his father's in North Jersey, and now we live together right outside New York City. So I thought it would be really fun because my boyfriend has been wanting to release his own podcast show that I'm helping him construct and give some ideas. So he wants to do a gay pop culture show. So look out for that soon. I won't give you any more details about that, but it will be really exciting and enjoyable. And I asked him, I said, Lawrence, can you please, please, please let all the listeners out there know 2 lessons that you've learned so far about moving in. So I'm going to hand him the microphone and then I will give 2 lessons that I've learned so far about moving in. Okay, so Lawrence is here. What are 2 lessons that you've learned so far about moving in?
Hi, baby. Good morning. Making sure you're fed at all times and just being respectful of each other and our space and our time.
Yes, I have a tendency to be very hangry, and I'm sure some of you out there understand that feeling. And then my 2 lessons are our walks are such beautiful therapy to clear our heads, and a clean home is a happy home for my boyfriend and for myself and processing our thoughts. So it's been so beautiful. I mean, all of you who've recently moved in, Mary just moved in with her boyfriend. I'm sure you all have learned a lot of lessons. So Neil, he also talks about that process of moving in because it happens in this specific Queer as Folk episode. We get a lot of conversations around the topic of moving in. Okay, so more news to come about my boyfriend's gay pop culture show. I can't wait. Hopefully, I think in the new year, it will be premiering in January-ish. So look out for that. And without further ado, here is our Queer as Folk rewatch show. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, where I'm joined with a fellow doctor. I want to give him his credit, Dr. Neil J. Young. Neil is a writer and the author of We Gather Together, The Religious Right and the Problem of Interfaith Politics. His work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, Los Angeles Times. He co-hosts the history podcast Past Present. So, if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, make sure you follow Past Present as well. Rate, review, do all the things there. He lives in Los Angeles and he's coming out soon. We'll definitely have you back on, Neil, when it comes out, because I know it's going to create a splash and I can't wait to read your book. It's called Coming Out Republican, A History of the Gay Right in April. So congratulations on that, Neil. And thanks for joining me to talk about Queer as Folk.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Of course. So right away, we're in episode 12, um, called Move It or Lose It. So all moving things happening with Michael and David and puns there. Um, but before we dive into the narrative and what's happening, I'm just curious. Were you surprised that I asked you to come on a Queer as Folk podcast series? Like, have you returned to the series within the last few years, or is this something that really hasn't been on your radar in a while?
Yes and no. I watched the original series when it came out, I believe in the early 2000s. Remind me of what these years are that it was running.
Yeah, this is 2001.
Okay, so I had, just to sort of set the scene, I had recently graduated from college, just moved to New York City. It felt very of the moment, right? To be like a young 20-something gay guy in New York City, and this major television show came on. I'm pretty sure I watched all the episodes as they ran at the time. And then I don't know, I would say maybe like a decade or so ago, my husband decided to watch this series. But interestingly, and I didn't really join him in that, but it was always sort of on in the background. He was watching it run on, I believe, TBS, like some very, mainstream cable channel where they edited out all the like language and certainly all the sex scenes and all the nudity. So there was a sort of recent, or at least 10 years ago, PG version of this that I sort of saw glancingly out of the side of my eye, but hadn't watched any of this until we watched today's episode again. And this one actually came sort of rushing back to me in memory as I watched
Yeah.
it.
Well, so right away, what do you feel about Michael and David's um move-in dilemmas and just the conflict that happens between them? Like, is someone in the wrong in your opinion, or are they both just really messing up on compromising together?
Well, it made me want to watch the previous episode because I'm like, do these people even know each other? Like, there were so many conversations they had where it's like, and I get it that they're probably also using these episodes to lay down some like character biography that just you do in a show, but they've moved in together. And then it seemed like they were getting surprised by just basic aspects of each other's life that felt like would have been the type of conversations you have early in a dating scenario, not once you are sharing real estate together. They both seem, I don't know. I feel like the good doctor, was really on the wrong of almost everything, like a control freak. He was not my favorite here. They both could work on their communication styles though.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, he has no idea about Michael's comic memorabilia
No,
and collection and is so surprised, as if he's never had any conversations about Michael's passions. Um,
or even been to his apartment before. Like, you would have seen
that's
this
true.
if you went over. Like, it shouldn't have been a surprise.
Well, so like what's knowledge you can give us? You're married, um, and I'm sure you've gone through a move-in process or like had those conversations. Like, as someone who I'm in a recent relationship and like joking around, I joke about moving, but like we have two different places and we like going back and forth. But, what's your advice as someone who's already done all of this, moving in?
Well, it's funny you asked that because watching this episode, it reminded me of when I moved in with my husband. We've been together for 17 and a half years. We moved in after we'd been dating a year. And it wasn't like a similar situation, but there were, I was a graduate student writing my dissertation when we moved in together. I had bookcases of books, and we moved into my husband's apartment at the time. And so that's always a little bit of a dicey situation, right? When you're not starting at a new place together, you're actually one person is moving into the other. That's a little bit uneven ground, literally, that you're on. And I remember the first day we were moving in, I had all my hundreds of books in boxes, and he said, "Are you cool with us just putting all these books under the bed?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? We have to, like, we're putting these out on the bookcases, like in your apartment, these bookcases that you have that are empty. We're going to put all my books in there." And and that also seems like a little bit of a story where clearly he knew what I did for a living. As a graduate student writing a dissertation, he knew books are important to me. But we always tell that story because it's sort of, he didn't necessarily realize how important that, like, books were things you would have out, as visible objects, not just something you would like sort of stow away under the bed. I think the most important thing always, always, always is communication. Like, they don't seem to have any skills at this. They seem to like sort of do things and then like cover up or deal with the damage, the fallout later. And again, this is a dramatic show that's obviously trying to use conflict to move, narrative forward. But I think one of the things I find interesting, even being this long into a relationship, is we're still learning our communication styles. We're still learning different ways of like best communicating with one another about things we're feeling and things we're experiencing. So it's never like a one size fit all thing, as much as there's an evolving aspect of that's like how you build a relationship together. I don't think these two, I mean, I know how this all plays out, but like even from this episode, that like it doesn't seem like they're gonna really go the distance.
Yeah. Well, do you think that you have to move in to like establish that next step of a relationship, or you can go back and forth between places and still like have a really committed relationship? Because that's where I feel David, he believes like they need to move in order to be partners together, and Michael like sees this more as a boyfriend scenario. Like David tries to distinguish between boyfriends and partners, which like on the last episode I was kind of debating that, not like critiquing my guess, but we were debating like what do those terms even mean in distinction? Like, isn't my feeling is a boyfriend should be your partner ultimately.
I mean, I think like that would be the trajectory that one would assume a relationship would unfold. That doesn't necessarily mean that all boyfriends become partners, and not, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, boyfriends become partners, become shared, no, I don't want to use the word roommates because that's like not the word at all, but like where the joint residential experience happens, and where the like defining of each other as partners, I think that can like one can become before the other depending on the couple. But that's obviously a trajectory that I think feels familiar to like most people, and like the sort of path towards marriage and commitment and long-term stability. I think what's really telling here, and it's interesting because I went and read the description of the previous episode, because there was a couple things that happened in the opening minutes of this episode that I was like, I'm not really sure what I need to know that's previously happened. So I went and read the description of episode 11, and they tried to break up with each other, or Michael tried to break up with David, but then David like beat him to the punch and asked to move in together. It's what I understood of the description. Is that right?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay, so that seems very problematic to me, right? Like, you're going to break up with a guy you're just dating, and then he asks you to move in together, and then you don't even use that to say, like, actually, you know what? I wanted to talk about our relationship and the way things are, and like, I'm not sure if I'm really feeling this dating. Like, that would be a wonderful opening to clarify just where things are right now, not to accept the invitation to move in together. And I think if one makes that decision, you both have to be on the same page about what it means to you. It doesn't have to be the same thing that it means to other people out there in the world, but the two of you need to know, what does it mean for us as a couple? What does it mean to me personally to make that next step my partner Nate and I talked about this when we were moving in together. It was actually, we've been dating 11 months, and we always joke about this, like, what in the world were we thinking? Partly it was a New York City real estate thing. Like, I was needing to move out of my apartment, and there was this part of us that was like, gosh, we've only been dating for 11 months. Like, ideally, we'd have like another year under our belt of dating. But, New York City real estate is tough, and I'm having to move out. And we also know that we're really, really serious. And we know that we are going to probably move in together if it would have been another 6 to 12 months. So let's do this now. But what does it mean for both of us? And we both said this means a serious lifelong commitment to each other. And I think as long as you say those things out loud, you articulate them, you know that both people are coming from the same place, or even if you're coming from a different place, you're okay with that difference. But these two guys are not talking about anything. They're just doing things, and like they're just sort of laying the groundwork for, I think, huge foundational issues going forward.
Yes, yes. So I'm glad you opened up about your own personal experience with the whole moving in. I mean, I'm even just curious, Neil, like what, now I think over 17 years you've said with your husband, what's like your approach in terms of conflict resolution, or like, because I feel like a lot of these couples, not just Michael and David, but all of these characters are not really well equipped to handle conflict, like knowing that that's part of a relationship. Like I've even had conversations recently with my boyfriend about, it's normal that we're going to have conflict. It's just we need to know that at the end of the day, we can talk through it and listen to each other and just try to resolve and hear each other out, even if we don't necessarily agree and we're not on the same page all the time. That's, I feel like a fantasy world if you think that there's never going to be conflict.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. All humans, especially in a relationship, are going to experience conflict for all sorts of different reasons. And I think the most important thing is not what the conflict is about, but how the conflict is handled. Because ultimately, that's the thing that lasts. And that's the thing that has more profound consequences. Whatever you're fighting over, you're going to forget about that. But the experience of it, or your inability to, or your ability to have conflict, to communicate, to resolve whatever resolution means for it, and to move forward, that's the stuff of relationships. I personally grew up in a home where almost no conflict happened, where everything was very, my parents are very sort of waspy Southerners. Everything is polite. Everything is really formal, not formal, but everything is polite, mannered, and no one ever has lost their temper. I don't think I've ever heard my parents scream, and I don't think that's a good thing. Ultimately, is what I've come to learn. But of course, like growing up, it's the thing you're used to. It's the thing and I think in a lot of ways, and I think that sort of history and that developmental experience made me in general a pretty conflict averse person, because I just haven't seen it modeled. I haven't experienced it, and so for me, it's like a big deal. And my husband had, a different experience. And I think so there's a reason we fit together. I think the sort of, conflict avoidant versus someone who's better at conflict, like there's a reason that's a sort of connection that we can actually have a relationship. It would be bad if and my husband is not at all conflict oriented, but I think he's been much better about when there's something that happens, like addressing it. And that's something I've learned a ton from him and really appreciate. And we've definitely have our conflicts that weren't handled well, especially in the early years. But that's where I think we've done the most growth. And for me, a lot of it was just realizing that a conflict isn't a big deal, because again, having not seen them, I didn't get to see conflict resolved. So for me, it was just the conflict was the big thing. And so I just sort of tended, especially in the early years, wanted to pretend like it's all fine, we're good. And of course, that's not a solution at all. But you're right. It's all about the sort of journey of the experience, not the thing that you're actually fighting about.
So you all have heard me talk about my friend Christian Garcia's excellent podcast called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Well, just in time for spooky season, everything fall and gothic, he just had on friend of the show, Joseph Federico, to talk about Dracula. Yes, Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. So you can now listen to that episode wherever you get your podcast, like Spotify or Apple. And you might have seen I've been releasing some That Old Gay Classic Cinema episodes on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. You can now listen to his premiere episode that I got to talk about The Sound of Music with him, which I really loves that I was on the inaugural episode. Thank you, Christian. Also, we released his Gone with the Wind episode, and we only released part one. So to listen to part two, you have to head over to his podcast. So if you love all things classic cinema and you've wondered, wait, what makes some classic cinema just really queer? Like, it actually sometimes is more homoerotic than current contemporary films. You want to listen to Christian's podcast. And he also has a special Wizard of Oz episode that I absolutely fan over. So listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema, Apple, Spotify, and he's on YouTube as well. I hope you all enjoy it. Are you currently looking for your next great read and you just don't know where to search? Well, I have a publisher for you. They are called Broadview Press. They're celebrating their 40-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, Broadview. And they are an independent publisher of humanities books. So next month for Native American Heritage Month, I have on Dr. Andrea Sullivan Clark, and she is going to educate us on indigenous philosophies of Turtle Island. You might wonder what Turtle Island is. And if you're listening and are in North America, I'm just going to give you a hint. You probably are in Turtle Island territory. So I can't wait for you all to hear more about Native American history and culture, just subjects that we need to learn about and we just don't in our primary school education. So Ways of Being in the World is Andrea's book. I can't wait for more of you to get your hands on it. Also, just in time for the Wicked film, Broadview Press has an edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz with the original illustrations. I was talking with Dylan from Broadview Press, and I always love talking with her because she informs me of what new books they're about to release. And guess what? Just in time for spooky season in the fall, they have a vampire literature anthology that collects so many different short stories that explore the vampire myth and just how this origin story of the vampire came to be in our culture. So I hope you get your hands on those books. And Dylan told me there is an exclusive code for all ITBR listeners. You get 20% off all of your Broadview Press orders. Broadviewpress.com. Go choose your books, type in Ivory Tower in the discount code section, and you will get 20% off. Make sure you follow Broadview Press to see all the new books that they are about to publish on Instagram at Broadview Press. Enjoy your reading, everyone. Yeah. Well, so what did you think then of Lindsay and Melanie? Because they're kind of
Oh my goodness.
like speaking to your WASP upbringing. Like Lindsay's very pretending that they can just keep moving forward without addressing the issues. And then Melanie's like on the opposite from a Jewish immigrant family and it's like, no, we talk about every, issue that's out there. Like we're going to like with a finely toothed comb pull back, every strand of hair. We have to go through it. And I kind of grew up in a family that was more like Melanie's, where like it was always a discussion. Like even if you didn't really think there was an issue, you just needed to hear it spoken out loud as a family. So like that's kind of how I approach discussions, is just like, well, let's just be proactive because I
Yeah.
don't want it to explode eventually.
It seems like
But
a
yeah.
good way of being. I actually wrote down what Melanie wrote because it was so wild. She wrote, "After neo-Nazis, there's nothing Jews fear more than silence," which I'm like, that's quite a line to begin with, but especially right now, it seemed like wow. Um, I think that it's interesting. What's the waspy character's name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay. So and she actually makes that explicit, right? Like I think at some point says like my waspy family,
Yes.
dot dot dot. I think Lindsay is pretty good at the conflict. If but she's very passive aggressive. And Melanie seems, well, actually, they both are. I mean, I really found these scenes between them just very uncomfortable to watch because they're just stabbing each other right and left, but they're not like facing each other and actually talking, communicating. Like it actually, even physically, like they were in different rooms and they're just like throwing barbs at each other. Like they're making these snide comments that are really hurtful, that are really loaded, that are clearly tied to some big relationship issues. I'm like, y'all need to just sit down on the couch and like lower the temperature and say what it is you need to say to each other. But I thought it sort of made me laugh when she sort of mentioned being a waspy, uptight family. I'm like, you're throwing plenty of stuff here too yourself.
Mm. No, you're right. And do you like though that Lindsay and Melanie are like enlisting their gay male friends as backup? Like Lindsay has Brian in one camp
Mm,
who's playing with his son Gus. Like, he um technically is the father, but like Melanie is raising us with Lindsay, but like Melanie doesn't have actual like legal guardianship because
mhm.
Brian won't sign the papers over to her. So there's that whole issue. And then, Melanie is like getting Ted on her side to try to distract Brian. So
Yeah.
uh, he's not there to, I guess, step into their relationship.
It seems a lot of like effort and a lot of commotion and a lot of diversion rather than just dealing with the issues at hand. And I get that, again, it's a TV show. They're trying to use drama to push plot forward and also maybe to involve more of the cast, but it it sort of was wild to me. I mean, I think partly the show is trying to, and again, like granted, this was 20 years ago. I mean, a very different LGBTQ reality than what we have sitting here in 2023, even with all the mess going on. But I think they were really trying to offer alternative models of family. Like that was a huge theme of the show. And so I get the way that they're really sort of drawing the boundaries of family here and thinking about extended networks that step out of sight of the, hetero patriarchal model. And also this is really messy because none of y'all are, it doesn't seem like that they're using this new model that they're creating to sort of enhance the family as much as they're using it as weapons against each other to just
Mm.
pursue their issues with one another. And that doesn't seem healthy at all.
Yeah. So like instead of this alternative family structure, like to present that it's possible to not have a nuclear structure, like you can raise a family in a community, it's not playing out that way. Like they're not embracing this other mode of family. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, if you're going to do that, you would think, okay, the more people that we have here, the more sort of strengths that we're drawing upon. And you're good at this, I'm good at that. You do this, you bring this to the relationship. Like we're all of us together are kind of corporately enhancing
Hmm.
this and not relying on the like two parent where, and it's not even two parents doing everything. It's like the mom that does everything. But that doesn't, at least in this episode, that's not what you see working out here. It's almost like everyone's pathologies are being weaponized and against one another. And that, Brian's being brought in or Ted's being brought in, again, not to like make things better, but like to hurt the other person.
Yeah. Well, so I have to ask you about another storyline that as I was watching in preparation, like knowing you were going to be the guest, like writing about, the history of the gay right. I'm like, okay, what does Neil think about the whole conversion therapy storyline that we get with Emmett? Because that's it was a curveball to me. I mean, I knew what would happen, but I always feel like it's a curveball of just this decision that he decides he's now going to abstain from sex and um, join Matt in this group therapy to become straight.
Okay, this storyline was wild.
Mhm.
Like, okay, so Emmett's making this decision, that alone. highly questionable, lots to unpack there. And also, he's still going to the gay bar every night. He's still going to the gay gym and hanging out in the locker room. Like, pick a lane, buddy. Like, and I get it. He's grappling with lots of things. It's not like he's really committed to this conversion therapy group as much as for whatever unclear reason he decides to go with this guy to the meeting. I mean, it would have made more sense if he was really attracted to the guy and it seemed like he was trying to make the decision, well, maybe I'm not going to be out and about anymore, but maybe I'll pursue like not a normal sort of conventional relationship with this one person, and it turns out this one person is something else. But this did not make any sense to me. I do think that the scenes in the conversion therapy, I was actually really excited to watch this episode because you told me that this was what this one was about, and I didn't really remember it. But I was sort of expecting a seriousness to this topic that the episode did not deliver. I mean, this was played not for laughs, but certainly and I get it, they shouldn't treat it seriously as like a legitimate thing, but they might have treated it seriously as like a real thing that exists. But like all of those characters were so laughable and so stereotypical, and like clearly we were just supposed to mock them. They were caricatures of even like not even of gay people. They were caricatures of like gay people who would do this sort of like silly notion in the first place. I'm not sure I'm answering your question about the gay right, but I think that there is sort of a way to think about small c conservatism in the LGBTQ community. And I've written this book about how it shows up, mostly in the political sphere. But I think we can think about what that means sort of in cultural politics and sexual politics and the way in which that might sort of have an overlap with some of this story. But like the conversion therapy, like, should we even understand these as part of the broad LGBTQ community? Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, wasn't there, I'm not going to remember the documentary name right now, but I'm pretty sure there was a real backlash to some reality show they were doing with
Mm,
like men who were gay, but then they married women, and I wanted to say they were Mormon. Maybe they weren't Mormon, but I feel like it was something religiously affiliated, and they decided that the reality show was going to follow men who are now going through conversion therapy. And
yeah.
like it got such huge backlash that they just ex-nayed the program. Um, yeah.
Doesn't ring a
But
bell for me, but seems very likely in terms of a reality show that might be out there.
yeah, but then like, we can bring someone up who's very timely, which would be, a George Santos Republican, which I was like, Neil must have some thoughts on George Santos. Which is like you can be a Republican now and be very outwardly gay. Um, and like it's not necessarily what you're going to be attacked for.
Absolutely.
Like in a George Santos case.
Absolutely.
Like there's a whole other litany of issues that had happened with him being expelled, but it wasn't his sexuality. So I find that a fascinating case study. I mean, is that something that's going to be addressed in your book, I'm assuming?
I do not mention George Santos because this was like unfolding as I was literally finishing the book and post-production. So I feel good about his name not making an appearance.
Yeah.
And yet I think I will probably write some public commentary about him in the coming months and in preparation for the book coming out in April. And you've really hit the nail on the head here with it, because the really striking thing in some ways I really feel like it's being underappreciated. And maybe that's a sign of progress, that the historical progress that is made is not really being recognized. And also it's weird to talk about historical progress when George Santos is the case that you're talking about. But it is historically significant that the least controversial thing about this man is that he's a public official, Republican elected official that's gay.
Mm.
Like everything else about him is the controversy. Everything else about him is what makes him a political liability. And so many of those things are what have, got him kicked from his seat. And that is a historical development that is not in keeping with several of the gay Republican congressmen that I write about in the 1970s and 80s who are outed because of sexual scandals and that lose their seats in Congress, or either resign or don't win re-election because of that. And it was doing everything. And their life to present a truthful, or to present a public image that was about hiding their sexuality. Whereas George Santos, it's almost like the only thing, as far as we know, that he has been honest about and is actually, under scrutiny proven to be true, is that he's a gay man. I mean, that's sort of wild, that every other aspect about his life pretty much has been the lie. Historically, it's the exact opposite, and I think that that's such a fascinating and obviously historically significant development. And then the interesting thing that I think, the way like Marjorie Taylor Greene and other of Santos defenders are weaponizing him being gay as their argument for why he's being targeted. So, Taylor Greene has said the only reason they're going after him is because, the only reason the Democrats are going after him is because he's a gay Republican, and they can't stand that. I mean, that's ridiculous, of course, but that is a political argument that a Republican can make in 2023, have some sort of weight to it. Like, you can go on Fox News and make that claim, and like the choir will think you're right. The choir that you're preaching to will think, yeah, that's exactly why. Those Democrats, they hate that a gay guy would be a Republican today.
Well, and like I was wondering, as you're watching Queer as Folk, something that I actually found really striking, like having a political analyst hat on, is that politics are really not even mentioned in the show. Like there
Yeah,
is no talk about political parties, or maybe eventually there will be, I forget, but it's not very. I feel like the fact that they're out and living their lives is the like political statement of the time, instead of, what is Brian's politics, or like what is Michael think, or, because I was trying to think, like, are there any political factions within the group? Like, are they all pretty monolithic and homogenous thinking, or would any of them be a gay Republican?
that
You
is a
know,
great question. I love that question. And you're right. There's no like capital P politics in this at all. And like, this is the first George W. Bush administration, the first term, right? When that was very much in the news, and in the sort of political coverage of the time. I do think the show becomes a little bit more political in the episodes ahead, if I remember correctly. But I love this question about thinking about what the politics of this. I mean, they're not really a diverse group of guys, right? They're all white. It's just sort of like their variability on the white gay scale. And even there, I think from bird's eye view, like, are they all that different? Not really. I mean, one could see Brian being the gay Republican, the sort
yeah.
of like entrepreneurial, like uh sort of wealthier one. But then you could also see him, I don't know, I like not being that, like having some really like snide comments about, George W. Bush, and that someone like Emmett, like maybe he's the surprise gay Republican that like actually has a really social conservatism to him, which I think we see in this episode. Or I don't know what all is happening for Emmett in this episode, other than
Yeah.
he's made a deal with God. But like, even him thinking that as a sort of bargaining tool that he went to suggests a sort of conservatism to him. Maybe Ted the accountant.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and before we dig back into Queer as Folk, I'm just curious, what reaction happens when people hear that like you're coming out with a book called, Coming Out Republican?
Well, a couple of different things. I've obviously been working on this book for a couple of years, as it takes to research and write a book. And especially at the beginning, when I was telling people, and this were like friends and family members, and even just like random people, that I was writing a book about the history of gay Republicans, I would say like 9 times out of 10, someone said to me, "Why would a gay person be a Republican?" And it annoyed me so much at first, because I was interpreting that question almost like, and therefore, why are you writing a book about it? Like, it was like a question that I thought was undermining my whole project. And then I realized, no, actually, they're asking the same question I'm asking. I'm just asking it with a little bit of a different tone, which is,
Mhm.
why would a gay person be a Republican? That's a historical question one might ask, and that I am actually answering and arguing changes over this 70-year period. And so it's a good question. So that was just sort of a interesting experience to have, especially in the early moments of beginning this project. One of the things that I found, especially now that we have a title and we have a book cover that have been made, public in the world, the vast reaction to the title and the cover has been, enthusiasm. There's been a handful of people, either random people who don't know me, people who do know me, who've reached out to me, on Twitter, on Instagram, in person, and have said things like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a gay Republican," or "I didn't know you were writing a memoir." And that caused huge panic for me because I'm not writing a memoir. I am not a gay Republican. This is a history of the gay right, as the subtitle on the book cover says. And you realize a couple things. People don't look at things really closely and they react really quickly. That's also scary given how much a book cover is meant to convey. So, me and the PR team at my publishing house are thinking about all the ways we will, through PR and marketing, make it clear that this is a history of the gay right, not a personal account of it. And also, like, this is going to come up here and there, and I'll just have to handle that as it does, and say this is not, an insider's perspective. This is a historian writing a deeply researched, archivally based history of a 70-year political history of a people that I relate to in some ways, but I am not one and the same with.
Yeah. Well, and I go to Fire Island a lot. Like I'll stay. I met a lot of people there. And trust me, Neil, I've seen all what I think surprised me actually about Fire Island is once, well, you know this, but once you get a large group of gay men together, the diversity of their political beliefs, I think would surprise the
Yeah,
general public.
yeah.
Like because people think that, oh no, all, you know, gay men are progressive. And that is definitely not the case from what I've seen on Fire Island. Yeah, there's been some conversations where even my eyebrows like went up, but it challenged me in a good way of, oh, you know what? I just need to listen. I'm not going to judge, and I just want to hear someone else's perspective.
Well, that's great to hear, because this summer you can recommend my newly published book to all of them to read. I mean,
Good.
what a cocktail chatter that you can have at all those parties. But I'm glad you said that, because the seed, the nugget of this book was planted in my mind more than 20 years ago when I first moved to New York City, right around the time that these episodes of the
Yeah.
first season of Queer as Folk were being launched. And I grew up in a Republican family, and I sort of moved to went away to college and came out and like changed my politics, as I think like a lot of people do, or sort of fully embraced all those things, and moved to New York City right after college, and was surprised by how many gay Republicans I was meeting. They were like bankers and they were consultants, and one of them told me about this organization that he was going to their meetings, called Log Cabin Republicans. I'd never heard of it before, and I just sort of put it in the back of my mind and thought, well, that's interesting. Fast forward a couple of years, I go to graduate school. I am a historian of conservatism. My first book is a history of the religious right. I'm trained under Alan Brinkley, the famous political historian. So I'm interviewing for a lot of political history jobs. And when you interview for jobs, you also let universities know what you imagine your second book project is going to be. And I was presenting myself as a historian of conservatism, and so on all those those interviews and those cover letters, I'd say, oh, my second project is going to be a history of gay Republicans, because I thought it would be this interesting way of, like, I did the religious right first, and then I did the gay right. And this is a way of thinking about actually how a lot of the demographics are sort of the flip sides of the same coin within the Republican Party, as opposed to thinking about, the religious right as opposed to sort of the secular LGBTQ left. Well, I didn't end up staying in academia. I didn't obviously work on that second project in the sort of professional timeline that I imagined. And I sort of put it out of mind. And the reason it came back to me as an idea to pursue more recently were two events that happened in 2019. And I wonder if these like register with you at all in terms of like what was happening, what you've sort of experienced out on Fire Island. First of all, Pete Buttigieg running for president, obviously not a Republican, but a centrist Democrat who, especially when he was running for president, who was getting attacked from the left, and attacked especially from the LGBTQ left. And I wrote a couple columns about sort of defending him and the sort of historic breakthrough that he represented, and that you can agree, you can disagree with him politically, but the sort of viciousness with which I saw a lot of gay people attacking him, I thought was interesting and disappointing. And I thought,
Do you ever think to yourself, wait, how does Andrew know about so many of the newest and current LGBTQ books? Well, my friends at the Gay and Lesbian Review have an amazing magazine. The Gay and Lesbian Review is a bi-monthly magazine, and it's always centered around a theme. So, for example, their November and December issue is called the Gossip Issue. And it features some authors who actually have been on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, like Ignacio Darnad, who runs the Breaking the Gay Code in R Instagram account. And I love that he's looking at Lorca and Dali in his newest article for the Gay and Lesbian Review. There's articles about D.H. Lawrence, about sodomy in the 1770s. Frank Rizzo, who is a theater critic, has an article, and I actually just recorded an episode with him. I can't wait for you all to hear it. We talk and gush about queer theater from the 1970s until the current day. The Gay and Lesbian Review has given me a promo code that I want you all to use. Go to glreview.org, glreview.org, type in promo code ITBR50 when you subscribe, and you will get 50% off your digital or print edition. I get the print edition because I just love to have a physical copy of the magazine. And the Gossip Issue, it's so exciting. My favorite Victorian author, Oscar Wilde, is featured on the cover holding a sunflower. So if you want the newest LGBTQ literature, film, TV, theater recommendations, you need the Gay and Lesbian Review. I hope you enjoy your reading, and please let me know if you are reading the Gay and Lesbian Review, what article you really liked, because I'll shout you out, and I'll even let the editors know, because I know they always want to know what the Ivory Tower Boiler Room audience is reading when they do get a Gay and Lesbian Review subscription. Okay, enjoy your reading.
like him as a sort of centrist figure really begged for us to understand the history of LGBTQ politics. It wasn't solely a progressive narrative. And then the other big event of 2019 was that the Trump campaign did a serious outreach to LGBTQ voters. It was a continuation of stuff they'd built in 2016, but was like much more developed in 2019 going into the 2020 race. And those two things, I was like, you know what? There still has not been a major book written about gay Republicans. Like, let me see if this is something I want to do. And spent some time in the archives, realized there was a huge story to tell here. But I wonder if that like overlaps with some of the like it must have like you know there must have been conversations on Fire Island about Pete Buttigieg and like all the other sort of politics that have unfolded in the last couple of years that sort of speak to that breadth of diversity within the politics of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, well, the critiques that I've heard about Pete Buttigieg are like the left like wing of politics that like argue that representation doesn't matter. What matters is like how democratic socially your policies are. So like, even saying Kamala Harris just because she's a woman of color, like that's not, you know, something to celebrate. Like right, Bernie Sanders in um his progressive policies, he's also um, you know, white male. I mean, he's Jewish, so he is marginalized in that way. But I just think it's interesting where I do think there's something to say about celebrating someone like their representation does matter for the general American audience. But yeah, the pulling apart of Pete Buttigieg, I feel like some thought he was actually a secretive Republican. Like I've even um heard friends of mine say they think he's in the log cabin Republican Party, which I think his image fits what you would think of as a very put together. He's right, a veteran, but he's in a committed relationship. I think
Yep.
it's beautiful what he has with Chasten, right? Is that
Yes.
his husband? Okay. Um, So yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Pete Buttigieg kind of like comes from this Queer as Folk model, but like when they rebooted Queer as Folk, they got rid of like any of these narratives
Yeah,
from the
totally.
2000 series, which I haven't watched the new one yet just because I don't want it to like really cloud my approach to this series, but I will see it and like do a special episode. But I don't know, Neil, did you see the new one?
I did not. This is also a story about my husband. He decided to watch those during the pandemic. I feel like it was a pandemic view. And
Mhm.
I think I watched the opening episode and I was just like, this isn't really speaking to me. And so we decided like he would watch that on his own and I didn't really participate. But it was again, it was like always on the background. So I would see it here and there. And it is almost unrecognizable. Other than the title, it's almost unrecognizable as having any connection to the Queer as Folk series that we're talking about now. I think you'll enjoy watching it and just seeing how much has been updated and diversified and the just incredible broadening of representation. And it's interesting because it sort of tacks with a lot of stuff. I interviewed more than 30 gay Republicans for this book project. And some of them were, no longer identify as Republican, but they were important figures in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Some of them are active leaders today. I mean, it really ran the gamut, but especially those who still identify as gay Republicans and are still, very involved in the organizations. One of the things a lot of them said to me was, you know, they're in the LGBTQ movement. They don't even care about the G anymore. It's all about the Q and the plus, and we're being left out of this. And you know, I to hear older white gay men saying that, there's a lot that's loaded there. But I think, something like this speaks to the sense that we're just not being represented anymore, publicly, and like the pop culture and the movement and this idea that like it's leaving us behind. And
Mm.
a lot of gay Republicans won't even use the LGBTQ terminology. I once described to one of my interviewees that I was just describing my project to him, and I said, and it's a history mostly about gay Republicans, but like thinking about the larger history of queer conservatism, which to me was just like an umbrella term of a like 70-year period of history on. And he
Mm.
interrupted me. We are not queer. That is not a word we use. We are gay. And I said, I understand that you are a gay Republican, but also there's a larger context, a larger history that I'm also investigating. But like his hackles were up about that word.
Yeah, well, if you haven't listened, I had Michaela Grifo on this podcast about a year ago, who was part of Radical Lesbians. She was like in the gay liberation movement at
Mm,
Stonewall. She didn't have like that, hot take, but she doesn't like to be identified as queer, and I understand that, argument. But she also said, like, where are the lesbians in representation? And I can understand, um, like, do you think it's something where, there's a fear that, being gay or lesbian, um, you know, like it's kind of become vanilla. Like they're afraid that it's passe or, you know, almost akin to like being straight. Like people are just forgetting about like being gay or lesbian is so binary in terms of sexuality now. Like we're queer as folk, like being gay runs the gamut. Like it doesn't with their race, of course, but it does with like their professions or like seeing how cloistered, like they are really a Fire Island type of
yeah,
community.
totally. Yeah.
Um, and like I would hear panics around, are we still going to have like all male nude spaces on Fire Island? Like this fear that um the LGBTQ community is going to penetrate that space and like close it down. And
Yeah.
there is like some basis of reality to it. Um, where like there has to be just more acceptance and understanding. But I don't really take wholeheartedly like that those spaces are going to be taken away from,
Right.
privileged gay white men. Um,
Or privileged gay white men will find and create new spaces for themselves as they always have. I mean, like, I think a lot of things are happening here, and this is such an interesting conversation. And I would say, and you've probably can relate to this too. I've had many a conversation with friends, acquaintances, most of whom, almost none of whom would identify as being right of center, who have expressed sort of similar sentiments of just like, wow, like kids these days, like you go to a gay bar and like no one's like, a jockey guy like it used to be, all these gender fluid, non-binary, like they're taking over. And I think one of the things, it's like, that's just a sort of generational observation, right? Like it's a generation is noticing that its sort of moment is passing and there's a new era and we see that over again within LGBTQ history, like on a number of different number of different ways. So I think like that's part of it. I think there is a politics to that. I mean, a lot of like the folks on the LGBTQ right, or especially the gay right, are really weaponizing this sort of conversation, especially as it relates to the trans issue. You have Andrew Sullivan out there arguing that gay men are not going to be allowed to exist anymore. And he makes this argument that like gender is no longer going to be acknowledged. Like this war on gender, these are his words, right? And others like him, this war on gender means that I cannot call myself a man who is attracted to another man, because that is to do that is to make a sort of a gendered, a sex-based argument or sex-based contention that we're not allowed to say anymore, or else we'll get canceled. And, I think that's not accurate. I think that that's hyperbolic. I think that that's an argument that's really meant to sort of play towards suburban voters who think of themselves as like, maybe not pro-gay, but not anti-gay. Like they don't have no problem with their gay next door neighbor, right? But the trans issue makes them really uncomfortable. But I think it just speaks to like the larger question of like, what does the LGBTQ community mean? And who all is in community within that community. I mean, we know historically it has been highly, highly segregated on all sorts of different issues, on race, on class, on sexuality. And so it shouldn't surprise us at all that we're seeing sort of new manifestations of those divisions. But I think those manifestations play out differently because, of course, the LGBTQ community is positioned differently within broader, like, quote unquote, mainstream culture than it was historically.
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, so I do have to ask you about, what did you think of the 10 ways to know if your husband's gay? That felt very dated in terms of like those cosmopolitan type articles or
I wrote that down on my list I didn't take many notes on this episode, but I wrote that down. I wrote 10 ways to know your husband is gay, dash, so bad. I mean, the jokes were horrible. The
yeah.
idea that one would stand outside on their coffee break and tell these sorts of jokes. I mean, it did, I mean, I guess you wouldn't have written it if it didn't seem sort of possible at the time, but it didn't even feel to me dated as much as just even, I don't know, watching it in 2002, 2003, you would also be like, well, this is stupid. This is ridiculous. Like, is that really what someone is doing? And they weren't even good. They weren't even funny.
No. But one of them was like, if your groom kisses his groomsman or
Yeah, I'm like,
something.
why would he do that?
Like, well, if he does that, then why did he even go through with this wedding?
Exactly. That was the opening one, if I remember. And I was like, this is really
Yeah.
bad. And like, it's Brian. No, not Brian. It's Michael, right? Michael's sitting there
Michael.
like a sad puppy, like unable to do anything. That felt like a historical relic. And I don't think that was inaccurate to the time, right? But yeah, it was that was a really bad scene, I thought.
Yeah. Well, how about, I do have to say, even though like we've kind of pulled apart David, um, something I find endearing is like David's puppy dog, like we're gonna spend Saturdays together. I want us to watch the game. It's like very um like he's really the bro, like he's the doctor sports bro. And I mean, it's sweet. I like to
Oh,
fantasize and
I'm yeah.
idolize that I'm just gonna like cuddle all day with my partner. And, that is like one of the, my oxytocin levels, I feel like are running wild right now from like cuddling, the beginning stages of romance. But, there's something to that fantasy, right? Like cooking with your husband. Like, do you relate to any of those
Oh,
daydreaming moments?
to me, that's not daydreaming. That's like that's my life, and that's what I mean. He seemed like boyfriend material to me. I mean, I'm not because he's like a controlling person who can't communicate, but like his sort of traditionalism, which I think is what he's conveying through that sort of domesticity, right? It's like let's stay home, let's watch the game. It's like bro, and it's also like tamed. It's like a tamed bro. Like let's just stay home, watch the game together, and cook. I'm like, sign me up. And I would say that's basically what the last 17 and a half years of my life has looked like. Not so much on the sports front. I'm actually a huge college football, a college sports fan, and my husband is not. But like that sort of domestic centered life is very relatable to me. Like all the gay club scenes to me, I haven't been at one really all that much in a very long time. And I think that I liked seeing that aspect of it. Again, I think they need to work some stuff out between them. I do not think that they're on the same page. But I think that's a completely relatable and a way that many a gay man and a gay couple are out there living their lives.
Yeah. Okay. And then I have to have you, as we're nearing the end, what do you think of um just Justin and Brian's ice cream dynamic? When I mean, I felt the chemistry between those actors, it's one of my favorites because I think they just really
I
knew
agree.
the intimacy aspect of acting. But yeah, like Brian saying, "Don't feed me that. I have to do 10 more minutes on the Stairmaster." Like Brian is he's he's like a sex fueled god, but he also is so uptight on his lifestyle. Like he's
On
very
pleasure.
neurotic and yes, and pleasure.
Right. I mean, it was, and also the way it was shot was so weird. I'm like, is this supposed to be suggestive? It felt potentially so. But it's also like, well, why is the ice cream out if you're not going to eat it? Like, like you would think that there would have been like they're sitting naked on each other and one of them is trying to feed the other one ice cream. Like you would think when you got out of the freezer, you'd be like, no, we're not. It was so
But
weird.
well, like, do you think that they just had sex? Because that's what I was thinking. Is this like Justin's after sex
Oh,
snack?
that's probably right. Right. Like he's gone over to the freezer and gotten it. He's enjoying it now. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. I think the other thing it's trying to convey, which becomes a big theme of their relationship, if I remember right, is like Justin's young. He can eat whatever he wants and the calories are falling off, right? But like Brian is sort of like it's starting to fade, right? He's having to be more mindful of these things. Like he's having to put in the extra work or like not eat the things because the metabolism alone isn't doing the work. And so
Yeah.
I think it's partly just suggesting that Justin, young, he doesn't have to worry about anything. He gets to live his life as he wants, like truly pleasure driven. Brian has lived his whole life pleasure driven, but now he has to think a little bit more strategically about like which pleasures he pursues over the others. And if he's prioritizing his body and his sexual life, then like other things are going to have to be scrutinized a bit more. But it was
Yeah, I mean,
just
the
have a
kiss
bite.
aspect, yeah, the kiss of like the ice cream, that is like to me an enticing aspect, but like the stickiness of ice cream just like going all down your body doesn't necessarily. I mean, I guess they'd have to take a shower anyway, so
I mean, I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum, and it
yeah.
certainly seems like actually a pretty vanilla example on the like if food play is your thing, but it just was. I thought it also was a weird choice.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you even think about if you have 5 more minutes, Neil,
Sure.
is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So just the things that are asked in this conversion therapy, because I had to write down like um when the leader is questioning Emmett and he's like, well, do you question any of these aspects? And he's like, do you and your friends obsess over your bodies? Do they obsess over celebrities? Do you not know names of someone you've slept with? Is this the life God wants for you? Like, is that where you mean it almost felt like but I'm a cheerleader in a way. Like it's so campy.
I don't even think it was campy. It just wasn't
Mm.
like good. It just wasn't thoughtful.
Yeah.
Like I just thought it was weird that they decided to do this storyline, but then to approach it so it felt almost half-heartedly. Like it just they didn't think through it. And like there's a campy version of this, right? That's so ridiculous that you're like, but I'm a cheerleader. Like that you're pushing the humor through the campiness of it to get to like the ridiculousness of it. This was like just it felt really lazy. I think that's the word. It felt lazy. Like, oh, we got to come up with like the types of things that these folks would say. It would probably be something along this line. It just no, they wouldn't. They would say something much more serious and much more, and again, I think it's inaccurately so, but sort of like psychologically and theologically developed. Like this was so bizarre and surfacey. It was, to me, it was the idea, like a liberal's idea of
Mm.
a religious conservative's view of homosexuality, and like like with like spending 2 minutes of thought on it. And again, I'm like, if you're gonna do this, and then Emmett is just like making fun of it, so why, which understandable, but like why are you there? And it didn't get
Yeah.
resolved. I assume like it's going to play out in another episode, but there was no, like I thought he was, when he stood up at the end, I thought he was going to tell them off, and he didn't really. It just,
No, no.
nothing happened.
Well, I feel like he went with this guy, Matt, like you've said before earlier in our discussion. It almost implies that he went with him because he's infatuated with him, but he's made this commitment that he's not going to have sex because he had this scare that he thought he had
Right.
HIV. And then he says, God, if I don't have HIV, I'm never going to have sex again. Um, but then, like, why does he follow this man to
Exactly.
this group? Yeah, it's
And why are you going to gay bars, and why are you at the gym in the locker room? Like, why are you doing, like, make it, and I get it. Like, people like people do live in multiple lanes at the same time. But he could have articulated that, right? Like, "Ah, I don't know why I'm at this gay bar when I said this, and like, why am I doing in this locker room?" Or like when he's there, like, actually, I just wanted to get to know you better because I thought like you were it. He actually, I think, needs more dialogue here
Yep.
to develop what this means for him as a character. Um, he's sort of bizarrely silent as he's making these big sort of plot point decisions.
yeah. Well, so you have a feeling that Emmett is the conversion therapy is not going to last,
I don't
in
think
your
so.
opinion. No, I mean, just to give a spoiler to everyone out there who does attempt to have a girlfriend. I think that's
Oh,
where the next episode takes us, which
okay.
is
I kind of remember that now. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that even seems like, again, there's nothing like planted here that would make that make sense. Like, and I get it. They're trying to like come up with storylines.
Mhm.
But it would make even more sense if he'd been like, wow, I've lived this promiscuous life. And like, what I need to do is find a boyfriend that I marry and commit to. And that, like, that's the struggle for him, is that he
Mm.
realizes, actually, no, I'm not relationship oriented. I'm not a monogamous person. Like that would be more believable, but actually be more interesting. It would be more, it would feel more coherent and consistent. Like this is so outside of the realm of anything that feels believable for, why am I paying attention to this? I'm going to take this seriously. And if the next episode is you have a girlfriend, like, let's just resolve this storyline and move back to you out and about with a half shirt on.
Yeah, well, and I always love when, you're so honest, or any of my guests, they're just so, like I always say, I don't need this to be rainbows and unicorn analyses, because I always say this is a soap opera. Um, and there's like the A characters and then there's the B
Right.
characters. And like, I mean, I love the actor who plays Emmett, but like Emmett, Ted, they're kind of on our periphery. And then we have like Brian and Michael. Like their storylines are the more fleshed out.
Right. Yeah.
Like I would say Brian has the most psychological depth, and then it's Michael, and then
Mhm.
probably actually Lindsay and Melanie have more depth in
Yeah.
this episode. And then Emmett and Ted are just like puppy dogs, thinking, going through different
Right.
journeys. But yeah, so this was so fun, Neil. I feel like you hit so many insightful uh analyses and just like teasing us off for your book, which definitely come back on. I'll
I would
be,
love that.
well read as to the history of the far right. I'll have to ask you about Fellow Travelers then, because that's all about politics and McCarthyism. Uh,
Well,
so I'm not sure. Have you watched it yet?
I haven't, but I just signed up for Paramount to be able to
Oh, good.
watch this episode, and I got the Paramount Plus Showtime option. And I
Oh,
told
good.
my husband today, I'm like, we're watching Travelers starting tonight. I'm really excited about that because it looks great, and would love to think about. I mean, it's exciting that that series was made, and McCarthyism, especially the Lavender Panic, and is a history that people need to know a lot better, because it's wild how horrible it was and how recent it was, and also something for us to be very aware of given things that are happening right now.
Yeah. Any gay Republicans to look out for right now, Neil? After George Santos sashayed his way out of the, running. Um,
No, I don't think in politics, but I think the and Andrew Sullivan remains, and he's not a Republican, he's as a conservative, but I think the intellectual front, the sort of media front of queer conservatism is the most interesting place, where you have Andrew Sullivan, you have Andy Ngo. I don't actually know how to say his name. Andy No. Can you edit
mm.
that? Do you know how I say that?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't know how, but wait, how do you spell his last name?
NGO.
Oh, okay.
Maybe just edit this out. Where you
I'll
have
edit it out. No, go
okay,
ahead.
where you have folks like Andrew Sullivan and other sort of right of center media figures, especially on Fox News. I think that's where it's really interesting to me, because they have a visible presence in the conservative media space. And I think, you know, to the extent that conservative media is the more powerful determinant of Republican politics than the party itself is these days, I think that's where it's really interesting to watch some of these folks operating.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it all goes back to Angels in America. Who is that lawyer?
Roy Cohn.
Yeah, Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
I just remember the complexity of a Roy Cohn type character and like what he went through with like the Rosenbergs and the execution of them, but also like hiding that he was gay, but then he developed HIV and AIDS. And yeah, I mean, I can't wait to like just see where your book picks up and where you start. So, for
Well,
everyone out there, Neil, how can they follow you on Instagram, social media? You know, get ready for your spring book premiere.
oh yeah, that's so nice. Yeah, I'm still on Twitter, even as it continues to fall apart. I
Yeah,
believe I'm Neil J. Young 17, and I think that's also my Instagram handle. Certainly, I hope you'll listen to Past Present Podcast if you're a podcast listener. Would love to have you over there. And the book is already up and available on Amazon and all the other places. You can pre-order it. Again, it's called Coming Out Republican. And I would love to talk with you about it in the spring.
yeah.
There's a lot more that we can say here. And I appreciate you having me on to talk about this episode. It was really fun.
Of course, yeah. Follow Neil. I agree with you. X, I still post, but who knows what's happening with the algorithm? I don't know. But people are there. There's a community somehow
Yep.
still lingering. So thank you so much, Neil. This has been wonderful.
Thank you again.